Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Like we say on this show, it all depends the time zone from where you are watching us from. Welcome to The Leader, courtesy of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya and Casalid on Hope Media. Tell a friend to tune in. Today's show is one that you would not want to miss. And we're so glad that we have with us here Dr. Langat, Dr. Robert Langat, the Vice Chair of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. The lens that we want to discuss, the integrity lens of theology, through the lens of integrity lens of theology. Does the church have integrity? Let's start from there.
Thank you so much, Edmund, and thank you for this invitation. And I also want to appreciate EAK for giving me the opportunity to serve as the vice chair to my brother Bishop Kitoto. That's a very loaded question because essentially the church should have integrity. And the topic itself is quite very interesting. Because part of what I would like to bring from my perspective and from where I sit is a corrective to the church that is supposed to be the light and the salt of the earth, but in so many ways it lacks that integrity, and that's why we're here to discuss that.
Because I'm looking at here, and we've got examples in the Bible. And one very famous one is remove the speck in your own eye before focusing on the log in your brother's eye.
That's right. Actually, the Christian life essentially is a life of a testimony. I come to testify to you what the Lord has done in my life, and that He can do the same in your life. But we're coming to a place where we're almost like that old man who said to the son while smoking that smoking is bad, and he's holding a cigarette himself. And in so many respects, the church has lost its power of witness, that transformative life that I have seen Christ work out something in me that He can also do in you. But while I say that, Edmond, I also strongly believe that the church still is the hope of the world. And today there are still many Christians, many church ministers that are holding to the truth. And that's why you look at the nation of Kenya, for instance, the changes that have come to EAK recently is as a result of our brother, Bishop David Okinde, being appointed as the chair of EACC. And he's succeeding another man of the cloth, Bishop Wabukala. And that speaks volume in itself, that while we have challenges in the church, the country and the society and the world is still looking up to the church as a place for hope, and a place that can provide integrity in a world that lacks that integrity.
Now, when you look at leadership in church and the aspect of integrity, what are some of these key issues in terms of culture? And then if we can then also, in a sense, then cascade it to society and government.
In Kenya today, this issue of Shakahola has really revealed another side of how the evangelical Christianity has evolved in this country to a place where the society is actually questioning. I want to begin by saying This has come about as a result of a lot of shifts. What we used to know as ministers have the simplicity of lifestyle, a self-giving, a sacrificial servanthood. That life, over time, as consumerism began to take hold of Christianity in this part of the world, people now go to church like they say we're shopping for a church. That is consumer culture. You go listen to a sermon to get what you feel like fits you. So it's about what fits me. It's about what I like. You know, what did I get out of that sermon? Rather than coming to church as an invitation by Christ to join him in what he's already doing. Church has become a place of self-actualization. And so if you go back, and the more back we go in time, in the development of church in history, the closer you are to the truth. As church has splintered and many things have been mixed up, our own culture, Western consumerism, and all kinds of things have filtered into how we practice our Christianity. We have produced a monster of a thing called church that is no longer reflective of the original intent of Christ as far as church is concerned. Now, when mission came to this country, the missionaries and our early church fathers in the nation really did a lot of good. Apart from discipleship and evangelization, so much of what we know of today in education, in health, and even in key civic institutions were developed and shaped by the church. And it's not only in Kenya alone. The church played a lot in building the architecture of Western civilization. It's hard to think of Western Europe in particular without the church. And so there is so much that filtered into the development of social, political, educational, and health life of the nation of Kenya through the church. Now, that is to a large extent the past. What we now see is a new Christian, a consumerist Christian that is not self-giving, that is not servantly. It's more of what I get out of the members. And that's where we now find the issue of ethics, ministerial ethics. We find the issue of where we're using the members rather than serving the members of the church, even as ministers.
Quite insightful. And what comes to mind is on matters integrity. Do you legislate integrity so that then it is acquired, or is it nurtured so that then we have individuals and evolve a culture that we not only aspire but live it, because it becomes now there's an aspect of value and culture when you look at integrity. Because if you overregulate that it must be there as a law, so to speak, then the question of compliance comes in, where the trend, the observation is that we only obey when we see the policeman not looking our ways. Or sometimes they're also involved in helping you break it. That's the danger.
Yeah. Do we legislate integrity?
How do you nurture it?
Looking at how Christian orthodoxy and how even the evangelical faith has been developed with some expectations over time, yes, it is important to have laws. I strongly believe myself today that the Kenyan society probably has more laws than we need.
Yes.
We have formed so many commissions. We have come up with so many acts of parliament, and even our constitution itself lays out very clearly certain rights and expectations, which filter us into our ethics and our integrity and what is expected of all of us. But as I travel around the country and make my deep observation of what is going on, it's nearly every sector of our country is totally corrupted. It lacks integrity. And what hurts me the most is that the church itself is, by and large, lacking integrity and even feeds into the culture of corruption and lack of ethics. Take, for instance, the whole area of theological education, where our early church fathers took it very seriously, that you would not just call yourself a doctor out of nowhere. Today, very serious, educated bishops, maybe educated in secular form, over a weekend pay for it 40,000 shillings, and they are given, I don't know whether from River Road, wherever they are coming from, a certificate called the Doctor of Philosophy. It used to be even that you don't get the Doctor of Philosophy through as an honorary. It's a research degree. But look at men who are running huge congregations and denominations in our country. In my own denomination, there used to be a program, a diploma program you would do for 16 years, a grassroots diploma program called Theological Education by Extension. And those elders sat in a classroom for 16 years.
16 years.
To get a diploma. And today, over a weekend,
16 hours.
You get your own, call yourself a doctor. Jump from standard 8 and call yourself a doctor. So, do we legislate? Yes, I believe there is a place for rules and a place for constitutions and policies in church institutions. And there is also a place for the laws of the country to take care of criminals. But I don't think we should over-legislate, because that freedom created in our Constitution, and also the expectation from every religious entity, is a freedom of religion. But I think the best way to go, which is what I want to underscore in this presentation, is a formation of a theological culture, a formation of a spiritual culture, of expectation, particularly through the umbrella bodies. And that if you are members of NCCK, if you're members of EAK, these are the expectations. You should make it a culture, more or less like what used to happen before there was Christianity in this part of the world. Our African traditional culture had expectations. They were unwritten, but you knew how to treat your parents, how to respect them, you knew when to marry, you knew how to live with members of the opposite sex, and so many other norms that nobody wrote. But the culture built a very strong culture of convictions and expectations that nobody would go against.
You've gone into an area that is very interesting now. That is theological integrity in relation to the regulation of churches. So when we say regulation, from your perspective where you sit, unpack it.
It's interesting that we're even talking about regulation of churches, because ideally, church should be the one to regulate the society. It shouldn't be some secular members of parliament, parliamentarians who have no sense of theology at all, sitting in parliament to come up with ways on how to regulate us because we have misbehaved. Because when you talk of regulating, it means there's something that has to be fixed that has gone wrong. So you will hear many of us in the evangelical cycles talking about more strongly on self-regulation. Regulating church by government would mean they determine what kind of a sermon you preach. They determine all mannerisms in terms of theological issues, which is really a non-governmental issue. The government shouldn't get into that space. But how are we going to save ourselves? I remember almost 10 years ago, we had this issue of self-regulation versus government regulation of church discussed. In fact, it was here in CITAM. And we fought very strongly as evangelicals. They said we don't want to be regulated by government, and rightly so. And then we said we're going to move into self-regulation. My recommendation at this point is we must be serious about that self-regulation. But it is not so much the creation of too many laws, because every denomination has got its own beliefs and practices, and you wouldn't want to get in deep into legislating how they do their own things. But surely, there has to be a strong umbrella bodies. And I think my recommendation would be, one, the umbrella bodies, the EAK, for instance, needs to be built very strongly and vet its members very well. That the expectations of those members of EAK, the same thing with the other umbrella bodies, are well considered. Secondly, there is a shift that has come to this country. The missionaries established Bible colleges and theological institutions. And we can never underestimate the power of these institutions to produce sound theological minds. Most of them today have shifted, and I don't want to name names, from being theological institutions to becoming universities. Some of them are more than 90% training for the government, secular courses. But theology is waning. So what is needed in the development of a culture, a strong theological culture, and a strong spiritual culture for the nation, is that the church, particularly the evangelical church, needs to invest very strongly on re-establishing theological institution, building strong theological colloquium where we share theological ideas. This is where you critique until it comes out into the society that this is the expectation of orthodoxy and evangelical Christianity. Do you know, Edmond, that a subject like the Trinity was being discussed in the public square in the early days? You know, the Trinity as we know it today is a theological construct that was done by the early church. And you would go to a butcher, they are discussing the Son is also God and the Holy Spirit. It was out there, but it began somewhere. And to me, re-establishment of strong theological institutions for training our pastors, doing research in theology, Bible colleges and seminaries are very strong. I am not against Christian university direction, but I think we have sold the soul of the church. The other one is biblical literacy. Why was the Dark Ages the Dark Ages? The Dark Ages were the Dark Ages because the Bible was removed from the hands of the masses. When the Bible is left with the so-called experts of theology, much as I'm emphasizing theological training for ministers, but if the Bible is left in their own hands, it's very easy for selfish purposes for the Bible to be messed up. But when biblical literacy, that is in our churches where we have Bible studies, we have very strong Bible exposition opportunities, and where there is question and answer, people will always find the truth. You remove the Bible from the hands of believers and leave it with the experts. I will tell you what needs to be done. You don't need to read your Bible. We have a problem. And I think there are many other things. Strengthening conferencing, fellowship, collaboration, networking, partnership across denominations tends to create a culture that checks one another. I've actually realized AGC used to be very strong in theological training and grounding people in biblical understanding. But I go around AGC today and I realize we're not an island. There is a lot of cross-pollination. There are practices that have come to our own denomination which were not part of us. Some of it, when you check through the lenses of the Bible, are not solid. I think also another thing that this country needs is a very strong theological accreditation. One of the things that has assisted the U.S., despite all their challenges, is that there is a group called ATS, Association of Theological Schools. It is an accrediting body for all religious training institutions in that nation. And it creates expectation. You cannot come up with a quack Bible college in your own corner that is not recognized by ATS. I don't think even there are too much legislation from government in terms of ATS, but it has created a culture that if you want to come up with something, this is where you go. So apart from building these institutions, I think we also need nationally, we have a group called ACTIA. I think it's coming from the Evangelical Alliance of Africa. I do not think the government recognizes them as such. I would actually encourage our leaders to consider empowering ACTIA and maybe forming a national entity out of it that accredits our theological institutions. Because it is also easy to have a theological institution that is teaching some of these funny Shakahola-like things if we don't have a body that provides accreditation. The other thing, Edmond, that I am looking at in terms of establishing a culture, because I shifted your question into more, instead of creating laws and rules, is how do we create a theological, a solid theological culture for our country? When I go to the bookshops, including our own Bethany bookshop, and I look at the shelves, and I look at the authors that are being sold by our own evangelical bookshops, sometimes I almost cry. Because most of those literature are not coming from solid, theologically sound minds. They're coming from prosperity gospel, this good morning Jesus type of stuff. They're not solid. And so what is needed also is for those of us who have the privilege to have been trained theologically to write and publish and distribute sound biblically based literature on various doctrinal issues. I was in Nigeria many years back. I think around 2004, 2005. I used to go teach at West Africa Theological Seminary. I was invited by this seminary provost at that time, Dr. Gary Maxey, and I thought I was going to teach in a Wesleyan Holiness seminary with the traditional evangelical people I knew. When I went, a class of 20 people, most of them were coming from all sorts of small cherubim, seraphim, all sorts of small denominations. Well, not small as such, because these guys in Nigeria, they run big churches.
Numbers,
but the names were funny. It's not the traditional Nazarene, all that you know. And I was a bit shaken to begin with, but later on, I left them with my notes coming from the seminary. When I came back, I realized a number of them had taken my notes and published them into books. And they were absorbing the truth so deeply. And that changed my perspective. And I realized Those of us from the mainline evangelical churches who have been trained theologically can be used of God to correct the theology of some of these other groups. Because when people are looking for truth, because some of these are going into all these teachings and practices, not because they want to run away from truth, it is because they have not been at the center of biblical hermeneutics and exposition where they are actually established very, very strongly. So I think the last one I would like to mention in terms of establishing the culture is establish strong accountability structures. That is where the umbrella bodies would insist, and also the government should, this is where the government can come in, insist that we have every church has a constitution, has got policies, financial policies, human resource policies, and also they are members of professional bodies. There are a number of professional bodies that provide checks and balances. I remember in the US they have a group called Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. You will find a number of evangelical mission agencies are part of it. Those are some of the things that the evangelicals in this country and also the Christian church in this country should do as part of that process of establishing a culture. Are we going to be able to root out all the cults and all the quacks? We may not, but surely we can form a culture of expectation that the majority of Christians in this country are at the center of sound theological integrity.
You know, when you're talking of the Trinity, a flash came to mind. We were discussing offset, Pastor Dennis White.
Yes.
The sermon that he gave, Trinity of... and those within, even in terms of peers, will be able to know amongst their own who is going rogue, who is going offline, the symptoms, and how to also then mitigate, report. What is criminal is criminal. You cannot have criminal acts and run to church that now leave this, self-regulate, yet you have a criminal element in it. You break the laws of the land, then let the government deal with you as a criminal.
Yeah.
Let the church not try to protect you.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for mentioning Dennis White. I love that preacher. I think he's one of those who shaped our Christian life. And President Moi, when I was a Christian Union chairman in the late 80s at Kabarak High School, made sure every term Dennis White is invited to speak. And in one of those sermons I have never forgotten. It's when he spoke on the Trinity of the devil, money, power, and sex. And when actually you look at that, many of our ministers, including what we now face in Shakahola, one of those three comes in. Many ministers who are falling off the grace are either gone into sexual immorality or they have gone into they're power hungry. All these bombastic things we're building and whatever, it's about power and then money and materialism. Those are the three, when they are put together,
explosive concoction.
Explosive. and you're right, the laws of the country should be enforced very strongly when it comes to criminality. I only see sometimes criminals are let free. Somebody has done something completely, I mean, even a murderer. I mean, you look at what has happened in Jakahola, but you may find the culprit free. You pay your bail and you bail yourself out and you are out there and you've destroyed thousands of lives. So there is a problem in our criminal justice system that needs to be looked at so that criminals are not let go very easily. Whatever they are, whether it is issues of immorality or issues related to embezzlement of public resources or church resources. I actually told my friend, Dr. David Okinde, when we were praying for him, commissioned him to be the next chair of EAK, ESCC. They're very related.
Yes, but yes.
I was asked to pray for him, and I said, Brother David Okinde, Bishop Okinde, the judgment must begin from the house of God.
Start from within.
us.
Start from within.
Start
Yes.
from within, and don't fear.
Don't fear.
If Bishop Langat is corrupt, if there are things that are unethical, begin right there. Just look at our lifestyle. Let's look at how we earn our living. And I think the laws of the country, when you have all these policies, everything structured, it's easy to catch. When you come to my denomination, there is a financial system, an accounting system. There's an audit system. If you want to find impropriety, you can easily find, especially when there are structures.
Who will watch the watchers, even just as you come to it, when it matters government? Is it creating the environment, or does it start regulating to what time you preach, how long, how the volume should be, when you should preach?
Who will watch the watchers? And I think in a well-run system, there should be checks and balances. You know, the state has its own checks and balances. And we thank God for Kenya. We have parliament checking the executive, and then we have, except when the executive muscles parliament.
Yes.
And I really pray that the executive should, as much as possible, allow freedom of parliament and freedom of the judiciary. But also all the arms should function in a way it benefits the citizens rather than just contradict themselves for the sake of it. Then we are in trouble. But in church also, for me, I'm the bishop, I'm the spiritual leader of the church, but I don't handle finances. So I can be told, Bishop, that expense is questionable. It cannot be admitted because there are other people that are running the financial system of the church. I run the spiritual system of the church. So those then can watch and check one another, the checks and balances. You may not have one being so much of a boss, but when you have systems, it's part of what I'm encouraging, that the evangelical church in this country really, among its members, before you become a member, say, of EAK, you need to be checked on how do you have policies, do you have a constitution, how does it function, when this messes up, who checks on them. And in a sense, it creates an internal self-regulation. Then you also create peer review. You can have a bunch of AGC, AIC ministers come and check at systems. And I think we should even include spiritual systems, that even the way we run services, the way we run, we run practices. If we have an orthodox practices, if some group of elders that are coming from your umbrella body can check you out and say, this one is not right. Those to me creates a self-regulation, but I'm using that word a bit loosely because we cannot force you as another denomination to do the way we do. But we can at least warn you that this is out of step with the general consensual Christianity in this country.
And hence the nurturing of the theological culture you're talking about.
Yes, yes.
And when does it start? Because you want to cascade it for ownership right at the individual family level. Because there are those who would see it more of curriculum and say, put it in the CBC as a subject, because you can do everything in terms of learning and passing and you still get it wrong. Because who is at the throne at the end of it all? Because governments of man will come and go. And when they're coming in, the incentive to get in is selling flowery manifestos.
Yes, yes.
But the delivery maybe something else.
Correct. I guess you're speaking now more of government. I think there is the government responsibility, which, in my view, Kenya has a lot of laws.
Maybe too
What,
many.
what Kenya doesn't have is the will.
Yes.
The will to enforce. And that's where I said I'm really saddened by the fact that when I look at the education system, I look at the political system, I look at the business world, I look at whether you look at the military or looking at the police, that sometimes feels like the police are sent to the road to just collect money from 1H. Very sad. But I strongly believe that the presidency needs to take a much more stronger stance, because the head is very important. If we get rotten at the head, it's hard to move forward. We know of nations that has just taken one individual who has become the head of state and cleaned up the system. I was very happy when the president cleaned up the KEMSA. We need to see more of that, where there is a no-nonsense commitment to clean up the system. Because when the head leads by example, it's very easy to deal with the other juniors. It's the same thing with the church. If the bishop is a man or a woman of integrity,
the rest will fall in line.
Will easily fall in line. I personally, I cannot stand immorality in AGC. I cannot stand embezzlement of funds in AGC. And so that's who we are, and we form that culture. So apart from the laws that are in there, whoever is the head of any organization, of any institution, or any country must be able to be a man or a woman of very high integrity. And the same thing with theological integrity, because you're talking about the theological integrity. What I teach as a leader of a denomination must be sound biblical doctrines. And that cascades easily to other places. And then I'm also able to come up with curriculum, come up with systems, come up with whatever. You don't have the moral authority to come up with strong systems that checks things out if you are not a man of integrity yourself.
How many other Shakaholas do we have, metaphorically speaking, even within? I know it's
Shakahola.
It's an interesting question, but it is what is topical, it is what is current, because like now, for example, bodies are being exhumed 10, 15, 20 every other day. One would ask, when did it start? What were the signs and symptoms?
Yeah.
Because it is ongoing, and you'd wonder, when will it end?
Yeah, when did it start, and who was involved, and who failed, what happened?
Because we can start passing the back, yeah. And even when do we stop passing the back? I mean, maybe it's an unfair question, because I'm aware that there are all manner of inquiries going on, and they would, but that doesn't stop us also from speaking. When we ask, speaking truth to power is not necessarily elective government, but truth to spiritual power in terms of where we may be failing, what are the signs and symptoms, because those who fall prey are not necessarily what makes us gullible.
The rain started beating on us way back, and while we see the extreme end of Shakahola, because the Shakahola is an extremity of how cultic prosperity consumer Christianity has developed in the 21st century Kenya. Now, the unfortunate thing, Edmond, and as you ask that question, are there more Shakaholas? There is what I call machia Shakahola in almost every denomination today in Kenya. That is, there are seeds. They may not have germinated and grown to the extremities of Shakahola. And part of my presentation today is to implore on the church across this country to watch out for Shakahola-like behaviors. There's a statement I don't want to leave this presentation before I mention.
Yes.
And the church has developed orthodoxy and orthopraxy over time. And in the early church, there was a man by the name St. Vincent of Lerins. St. Vincent of Lerins came up with what it came to be known as Vincentian canon. And Vincentian canon meant what has been believed everywhere, always, and by all. This was a triple test of ecumenicity, antiquity, and consent. Meaning, what is truth is that which has been believed by the church everywhere. And in that early time, it was both the Eastern Church and the Western Church. What developed to be now the Eastern Orthodox and then the Western Christianity, which gave birth to a lot of our churches here in Kenya. It's, for instance, the church believes, as an Orthodox belief, that the Christ is entirely divine and also entirely human. That the divinity of Christ and the humanity of Christ. That is a standard Orthodox belief across the ages. But also there is the orthopraxy, that out of that belief, then come our practices. And it has to be, that is what was believed, those in the early days, believed everywhere, believed always. So it has those three triple tests: everywhere, always, and by all. When you see a generation in our Kenyan Christianity, some practices that were never part of the early church, they were not practiced by the church for 2,000 years. They are novel. This thing now we are selling oil or selling some water. These things that you will see people washing the roads for ministers. There is so much that has come in the 21st century. I saw the other day a minister, I don't know, he's in a drum of water and naked, and he draws a cup or cups of water from that drum and he's giving every minister. You've seen people do all sorts of funny things or crazy things with panties of women. I think in Tanzania the other day, there was this, is it a woman bishop, asking men to come and cleanse themselves by breastfeeding on that. Those are practices that have gone so extreme. Now, others are still mild, and so we have not labeled them like the Shakahola. So I would like to say, if there is a new practice in the church that was never done everywhere and by all churches,
For all.
and by all, that I check to know that is not consensual Christianity. That is not Orthodox Christianity. And I know it's quite a loaded statement, but our theologians and people who are training our pastors need to be training more along those lines, that when you see a new practice that has not been done by the church for 2,000 years, we are going off the line.
Hence the signs and symptoms that one would be able to start picking and seeing there's something wrong and arrest it in good time.
Yes, 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 yes. And one of the things that I implore, particularly on pastors, is if you search even in the web, and particularly solid ones, it will give you a number of. If you want to understand what a cult is, there are certain symptoms, where they place their leader, and how their leader plays into people's lives. Are people having freedom to inquire truth, to read the Bible, and to question even the leadership? There's so much that goes into the formation of cultic beliefs that if our members are aware, and I want to, in the interest of time, encourage the pastors to teach people on signs of cultism and cultic beliefs. They are very obvious. Mostly there's this excessive commitment to one leader or a group of leaders and their ideologies, whether they are alive or dead. You find total commitment to, and they take that leader to be law and truth. They are not allowed to question anything or to doubt. They are punished for that. They are people who have taken completely over the minds of Christians. You cannot marry, you cannot, they determine when to buy, when you can buy your land, when you can, there's even some very weird things. That's why families are breaking apart, because certain religious leader somewhere controls the behavior of that family. And they tend to isolate people. That's what happened in Shakahola. You find a leader that is very isolationist, and it comes to how you relate to your family, you relate to members of the society. Some come with all these titles of messianic title, the Jesus of Tongaren, all kinds of. There are things that we as solid evangelical church leaders must be able to teach our people on signs of cultic behaviors. But also, we must root out ourselves if we already are practicing certain things that were never practiced by the church for 2,000 years. I do not believe that Jesus was hiding any truth and any practice that would serve the purposes of the church. And he left 2,000 years and millions of Christians to die without practicing what we are practicing today. We need to be very careful.
And therein, just what you've mentioned, in terms of who are we referencing and where we are going, it matters integrity. And I'd like you to speak to the example of Jesus Christ in how he nurtured that theological integrity even within the disciples and what is expected of them, and even God still on the throne, and man as we evolve, as we are still looking for, because the day of judgment is coming. So let us not operate and live on this earth like as if,
True.
We are the ones in control.
Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And whether you're looking through the lens of theological integrity and interpretation of scriptures, Jesus exemplified perfectly, with no guile, no misleading whatsoever. And of course, he taught himself very strongly that if anybody misleads the least of these, rather put a stone around the neck of that person and be drawn into the lake. I think that strong statement from Jesus was an indicator of how terrible it is to mislead the children of God. And then he himself, as a minister, whether you're looking at the morality, whether you're looking at ministerial ethics, the simplicity of Christ, he was extremely simple. And that is why the founders of the church in Africa were more Christ-like than we are today. We are so driven by all kinds of things today. And as you say, the Bible talks about the judgment of the teachers. That those of us who have the responsibility of teaching truth, if we mislead the flock, our judgment will be more heavier. But also, on the other side, the positive side is that the shepherds have a ground that never fades because of their responsibility of holding up and holding the people of God in their hearts as they shepherd the flock.
I know even as we are coming to wind up, in your parting shot, do we need a spiritual reset as we look at the theological lens of integrity in Kenya? What would it mean in your parting shot as we wind up?
We do. Every generation needs a spiritual reset. And the church history is full of that. The tendency for the fire is to go out. The tendency also for the truth is to be corrupted. And so there is a need for revival of the truth. And some of what I outlined in terms of revisiting our biblical culture and discipleship, revisiting the formation of strong theological institutions and accountability structures of theology. But I also believe that because sin has played a major role in this, we need revival. And that is what has happened in the church across the ages. That after about 100 years of Christianity in a land, that fire tends to go out and get corrupted and fits into the overall secular culture and evil culture. So we do need a spiritual reset. And I appreciate Edmund's opportunity to share today. And I want to thank God for this privilege of sitting with you.
We thank God for you, and indeed, that has been the leader with Dr. Robert Langat, Vice Chair, Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. And the topic, through the integrity lens of theology. Let's do this next week, same time. God bless. Thank you for the privilege of your time.